welcome to the Integrate This EdTech Podcast. I'm David Berner, joined by co-host Jeremy Mikla, and today we have a special guest with us, Tara Nattrass. Tara has had a bunch of different experiences in the education field, and we'll be able to learn about those and talk with Tara today. Tara and I have actually, I think we've run into each other a couple times. I think maybe once at ISTE, and then for sure, I know at least one time, which was recently at FETC, and had a chance to attend a session with Tara and Kip Glazer actually on AI. It was a great session, and had a great time at FETC. But Tara, welcome to the show. And do you want to kind of get us started and just tell our viewers and listeners how you got to where you got to today and all your different experiences?
Thanks so much for having me. It's really good to be here with you both. And I know, David, we had a chance to connect at FETC and probably in lots of other places, right? As I meet people and go, how did we not know each other before? I think we had that moment when we were at FETC and really wanted to continue the conversation that was happening both at the session with Kip and then more broadly around what's happening in the education space related to AI, related to kind of reinventing what's happening in schools more broadly. And so throughout my career, I have really been focused on what I used to talk about as reinventing learning, but now talk about as reinventing what's happening in our schools and in our classrooms, because we have a good understanding of what's happening with the learning process. Now we need to take that and really apply it into what's happening in our schools and districts. And so I started my career, like many others, in the classroom as an educator, primarily teaching elementary school, third and fourth grade, which is a great space to be in, I think. And then continued in lots of teacher leadership roles and school and district leadership roles. And regardless of that work and those roles, really was thinking about how we can make school awesome and meaningful for our kids. So, like many of us, your first year as a teacher, you're just trying to figure things out. I remember the moment on the first day of school, my first year of teaching, when all of the kids are coming into your classroom and you're like, oh, now what? Right? Like, I have these kids and they are my responsibility for this entire school year. And you spend that first year learning. And then I've had these distinct moments throughout my career. Like that summer, I did some project construct and writing training and other things and realized, like, oh, there are lots of different ways that we can engage students and teach differently, and have kind of carried that with me. I was the teacher that wrote grants for an outdoor garden and took kids on all kinds of field trips and found grants to do it so that we were engaged in really authentic learning. And I think my initial understanding of that has only grown as a building leader and a district leader, and really thinking about what are the ways that we can create flexible and adaptable environments for our students. How do we build competency-based learning environments? How do we ensure that when we are bringing technology into the classrooms, we're doing it in really meaningful ways? And so doing that as a building leader, most recently, I was the assistant SUP for teaching and learning in Arlington Public Schools in Virginia, and then transitioned out of that role into more consultative roles at several organizations, including ISTE and ASCD, where I managed innovation strategy, which really meant a lot of our AI work, a lot of our higher education work, and a lot of our professional learning. And over the last year or so, have been at Lenovo as a chief innovation strategist, where I've continued on that journey. All of those roles have really been about making school awesome in a place where our kids are learning at high levels and there's a sense of belonging and high community.
And you also taught it in England, right? At some point?
Yes. Yep. I taught third grade at an international school right outside of London.
Was there anything that was like starkly different, from what you experience here in the US?
Yeah. So The systems are a bit different because I was in an international school. There was an IB curriculum. We have lots of IB programs across the US as well. And so there are a lot of similarities with some nuance differences. But I think no matter where we are, the focus really is on how do we help our students get excited about learning, have the joy in school. I will say one of the things that was different, but doesn't have to be, was the focus on the joy that comes with learning, because there wasn't a focus on accountability and testing and a lot of the things that we put a lot of weight on within an international school, that there felt like there was a little bit more joy and a little bit more freedom in what was happening in classrooms.
Yeah, and I think that's important to note that, I think as you were saying, learning should be joyful, but it's also it is the thing that we should be focusing on here, regardless of the amount of technology that you integrate into what you do in the classroom. And I think that brings up this piece that you wrote for ASCD, called Recentering the AI in Education Conversation.
Mhm.
And basically, I think your premise, is everyone's seems to be obsessing over AI tools, and really that's the wrong conversation that we should be having. We should be talking more about what is learning supposed to look like. Can you talk any more about that?
Yeah, and I've shifted. I think I wrote that about a year or so ago, and you both know with the AI and education conversation, what we're talking about today, most likely we weren't even talking about yesterday. But I think a lot of what is in that article still holds true. I've shifted it a little bit to say that the AI and education journey isn't actually about AI, right? And so when we think about what we are focusing on within these conversations, we have spent a lot of time, and rightfully so, on defining what we mean by AI in education and talking about the opportunities and risks and thinking about the implications for things like digital citizenship. But what it's really about is how do we use this as a catalyst to say, if AI exists, and we know that these are the ways in which we are engaging, especially with an arrival technology that most people have access to immediately. This isn't like rolling out a learning management system where we're going to take 3 to 5 years and train people and start at different grade levels. It is an arrival technology that is immediate, right? And we have to figure out how we navigate that. And so I think it's a catalyst for, if this exists, what are the things that are most essential for us within the education space? And how do we leverage things like the science of learning and elevate the skills that matter most and really prioritize relationships and connections? And then think about, how does AI support us in doing that, as opposed to having AI be the lead, right? The lead is what we want to see from a teaching and learning perspective. AI is then the, can it help us in that? And if it can, that's fantastic. And if it can't, then maybe it isn't part of that particular learning experience.
Right, and that's where I think it's important to recognize the experiences that a teacher has that really AI can't replace. AI can't replace, I think, that teacher's knowledge of their students, the time that they spend to really get to know them, to be able to understand how learning is going to impact them. But a teacher could draw upon AI to be that source to help give them ideas, to help maybe structure an activity in such a way that it's going to engage more of their students in that personalized way.
Yeah, I mean, the context matters, right?
Mhm.
And so knowing the context, knowing your students, being able to read the room and understand that when students engage in a particular way or behave in a particular way, and understand why they're doing that and can respond accordingly, right? Like that's what teachers are doing. I can't remember, but there's data out there somewhere about the number of decisions teachers make in a day, right? Based on that kind of feedback and the interactions they have. And it's astonishing when you think about the numbers. And I think those are the kinds of things that, while AI can respond to how a student answered a question, it's not in the same way because of the lack of context and
Mhm.
other kind of indicators and clues that teachers often have.
Do you feel though like teachers, if they're making these, I've seen statistics like that too, with the hundreds of decisions that
Yeah,
they're
I can't
making at
remember
any
what it is.
given moment, right? And so do you think teachers are sometimes, do they get caught up in looking for the efficiency that maybe AI can bring, and then they lose sight of some of the more impactful things that AI can also bring? Or is it just enough that it might help them save some time that they can then turn around and use in more productive ways?
So I think when generative AI, right? Because we also say AI, and AI means lots of different things to different people. And we've had AI in our classrooms in different ways for at least the last decade or so. When you look at a lot of the reactive and predictive AI tools that are out there, and then several years ago, when generative AI came on the scene, the conversation became about initially efficiencies
Mhm.
because people could see how quickly you could create something. And we've had to kind of backpedal from that conversation to say, when we're talking about generative AI, when we're talking about agentic AI, it is, yes, about efficiency, but it's about more than that, right? What are the things that make sense to automize? What are the things that make sense to be more efficient in? And whether or not that frees up some time, I think is still a conversation, right? Because as you're trying to get the AI tools to do the things you want them to do, it has evolved so rapidly in the last several years that we can do things we couldn't even do 6 months ago. But trying to figure out that where the efficiencies make sense, where do I stay engaged, and how am I still part of the process, I think is a lot of what we're grappling with right now. But the conversation started with efficiency, and
Mhm.
now we're starting to shift it into a lot of other things.
Can you talk a little bit about this concept of durable skills when it comes to students? Like as you look at what's been around for a long time now, is that the four C's concept: critical thinking, creative thinking, communication, collaboration, all those things that have been around for a while. How do you feel like AI is impacting that in terms of schools? Is it forcing them to pursue those more? What do you think as far as those things are, um, the impact of those four C's as it comes to AI?
Yeah, so a lot of schools, districts, and even states have portraits of a graduate, profiles of a graduate, portraits of a learner. They call them multiple different things, really trying to get at learning is, yes, about knowledge. It's also that content knowledge, but it's also about skills and attitudes or attributes. And we are starting to see kind of a resurgence of those particular skills. And even when we look at resources like the World Economic Forum puts out, the Future of Work report. And if you look at the top 10 skills from that report, the first three are AI and big data, networks and cybersecurity, and technological literacy. All three of those have a technology base to them, but then there are also things in there like creative thinking, curiosity and lifelong learning, analytical thinking, resilience, flexibility, and agility. And so while those three are there, the other seven are all interpersonal and intrapersonal skills. And how we bring those into the classroom to ensure that our students have opportunities to engage in those skills throughout the course of the school day is more important now than I think it was before. Because if we all have access to this technology that can allow us to do things that weren't possible before, how we engage with that technology and how we engage with one another is really going to be the differentiator, right? And so how we build those skills matters quite a bit. And we're seeing that in all kinds of reports, whether from the World Economic Forum or others, that these are the essential skills as we move forward.
What do you think those essential skills that you mentioned? Have you seen any good examples of, or what would you consider some of the ways where districts can start to implement those to get students some of those opportunities? Do you think that because of our access with AI and things like that, they're just happening naturally, and they're able to do some of them? Or what's your thoughts on how to approach ensuring that students get opportunities to engage in those opportunities for gaining those skills?
Yeah, so some of it is what we've known for a long time around how we engage with students, and thinking about the conversations around the science of learning and conversations around, like you said, the 6 C's and things. And I think where we are right now, you said 4, but sometimes it's 4, sometimes it's 5, sometimes it's 6. Like, pick your number of C's, right? Depending on
Right.
what it is you're looking at. But for some reason, it's always been C's. And then someone adds something, you're like, wait, what? That's a different letter. But either way, that same concept. And I think what we are really thinking through right now is how does AI play a role in that? And so when you ask about how districts might bring those C's into the conversation, I'm seeing it some where districts are also focusing on building AI literacy. Because when we talk about AI literacy, we're talking about much more than the technical skills. We're also talking about the durable skills, the future ready attitudes, and asking students to critically evaluate the benefits, risks, and implications of AI literacy. And so, a very concrete example of all of this, we have often in schools asked kids to write 5-paragraph essays. And that could be on any number of things. And there's also been research done that 5-paragraph essays don't exist outside of school, but that's a whole nother conversation. But we often ask kids to write a 5-paragraph essay on any number of topics. And so imagine that we are asking students to write a 5-paragraph essay on the causes of housing affordability challenges. If I ask a student to do that now, what might they do? You guys can take that as a rhetorical question now, right? But if you're a student right now, you say, like, write a 5-paragraph essay on the causes of local housing affordability, you might go to your favorite AI tool, give it that as a prompt, and come up with an essay, right? So we're really going into this world of what then does assessment look like? And how do I know if students have learned the things I need them to learn when we're thinking about those 4, 5, or 6 C's? And so one of the things that we're starting to see a lot more in schools are performance tasks. We've been talking about performance tasks for decades in schools, but the realization that if we're building out performance tasks, not only are we asking students to engage in those skills, but what we're also doing is asking them to think about how AI might be used to support critical thinking or communication or some of those other C's that we talk about. And so instead of that 5-paragraph essay on affordable housing, what if we ask them to investigate the root causes as to why it's so challenging to have affordable housing in particular communities, or to analyze the stakeholder impacts, or to model budget implications? And not only ask them to do that kind of work, but one of the districts I was working with recently also then said to their students, okay, if this is our assignment, in what ways do you all think AI would enhance your learning and would be responsible use? In what ways would it not be allowable, right? How might you use it in your work if you're doing a task like this? So now all of a sudden, I'm not only building the thinking that we need for our students, but I'm also strengthening AI literacy. And so the students come up with a list like, well, I think we should use AI, or could be able to use AI to do things like brainstorm policy options, or draft the headlines after we figured out our piece, or translate a survey. But we're not going to use AI to create citations or quotes or write the policy brief on its own. And so students are having to engage in a lot of those durable skills to do an assignment like this while also building in AI literacy. So that's a practical example of like, how do we do this? What does it actually look like on the ground in a classroom?
I want to kind of jump off that AI literacy point here that you were just talking about here a little bit. And, I think it is very valuable for students, but I think also for our teachers is to make sure that they are getting the AI literacy training that they need as well, right? But I'm kind of like, I'm struggling with this a little bit myself is in many of the sessions that I present at, and I know David does as well, how much of the learning about AI do teachers need to have or learning with AI? Is there a balance to strike between there? Or, and I've seen many different parts of that conversation taking place where, no, just get it in the hands of the teachers, let them go, and others are like, no, in order to really understand what it's doing, you have to look underneath the hood, and you have to do more than just point out, there's the dipstick, this is where you put gas in, like to understand how the functionality of what you're using impacts the output of what you get.
And I think there needs to be some knowledge around functionality, like understanding what is a large language model, right? And that essentially I always say we're predicting the next most likely word when you're using a generative AI tool, right? That is generating a text for you. I don't think that we have to know the intricacies of that. One of the things that I often talk with educators about is what we talked about a little bit earlier, and that there are different types of AI. And when people think about AI, what comes to mind is going to be very different for different people. And so knowing and understanding that there are predictive, reactive, or classical AI, depending on who you talk to, right? But all of those things kind of meaning the tools that are analyzing historical data and they're predicting future events. So your Netflix that is recommending the next 3 things to watch, right? We all have been using those tools now for quite some time. Then we've got the generative AI conversation, which is about generating new content and outputs. The agentic AI conversation, where these tools are really making decisions and taking steps and adapting based on new information, and oftentimes on their own with the checking back and forth. And then we talk about physical AI. Do I need to know and understand, right? Which are the robots that everyone, when you hit AI, right? They go, oh, robots. And some people do, others don't. But that physical AI piece, I don't know that folks need to know and understand all of the intricacies behind those, but they need to know that they exist and that they're often working in concert in a lot of the tools that we already have available to us. So, AI is being integrated into a lot of the digital platforms that have been in our schools for a long time. I need to know and understand that. I need to know and understand that these tools do still hallucinate and will make mistakes. I was working with one today and it kept changing a map I had. And I was like, no, this is the state I want. But it's still going to hallucinate sometimes. It does have harmful bias, and we need to be checking for that. I can use it to create lots of misinformation and disinformation if I choose to do so. I need to understand those things as an educator, because if I'm going to be using these tools to create, I have to know and understand that what I am creating may not always give me the exact result I want. And so I do think it's important that we understand there are different types of AI, that there are risks associated with those, and then I can start utilizing those tools.
And one of the big things too is we have where there's the trainings that need to happen. We need to get teachers up to speed on all the things that AI is and how to use it, how to implement it with your curriculum, and then there's a student side and all of that. one of the things that we've been looking at a lot, and you and I talked about this actually in our previous meeting together, about districts setting up teams and AI task force so that there can be something driven from the top down on how a district's going to approach AI. Can you talk a little bit about what you've seen in terms of how some AI task force have been done at both like maybe the individual district level, but then also you work with state departments too on how that might look, and if there is anything, how do those conversations usually go, or what are you seeing that's a common thread among like what comes from the state versus what districts are doing? Because we've seen so many states, and it's gotten better where they've developed their state guidelines, but we have, even with state guidelines, districts are still kind of on their own and choosing what they want to do, right? And so what are your thoughts as far as that goes with what you've seen?
Yeah. A few patterns, whether we're talking districts or we're talking state level. When launching a lot of this work, one of the first things that tends to happen is people trying to figure out like who is on the task force and what do we really want this to look like. And the ways in which the task force itself is selected matters, right? We all know that. We want diverse representation. We want to make sure that we have people who are sitting in a variety of roles from across a district. And so many districts do seek to include teachers, administrators, counselors, special education teachers, right? Like hitting all of those different buckets, and also hitting who are our folks who are the early adopters, who are all in on this and are moving forward with or without any kind of guidance from the district or the state. And who are the folks who are saying, I don't want anything to do with this. I think that we should not be bringing it into our classrooms. I am really concerned about these 6 things because we need those different voices in the room. Because what we sometimes see is folks who are super excited about this are doing incredible things and then realize, oh, wait, I need to go back and reconsider privacy and security implications. And then you have the person who is saying, if you use AI, or I think you use AI, you're going to fail my class. And they're teaching next to the person who's going all in and they teach the same class, right? And so bringing those people together on the task force is important because you need all of those perspectives in order to really make the best possible decisions we can make. So that's one piece. Another is spending time with the task force, building capacity. Like, we write a lot of policies and a lot of guidelines in the education space. We're usually writing about things we know about. Educators were not heavily immersed in AI conversations until generative AI came on the scene. And they're doing lots and lots of other things. And so they don't have time to do these deep dives into what we're talking about when we're talking about these components of AI. And so spending a good amount of time, and when I say a good amount of time, I'm talking days, digging into what do we need to know about AI? What is out there from other districts and states and global organizations that folks have been digging into, so that I know and understand and can get to a place where I can identify the opportunities and the risks, so that then we can create guidance that addresses those things. If we really want to get at the opportunities, we have to know and understand the risks so we can create guidance around those. And then these teams obviously are meeting multiple times and building off of that learning to create that guidance. It also, I think, is important and has been pretty consistent that we're bringing in student and parent voices into the conversation by either making sure they're on the task force or doing a lot of really intentional focus groups to say, what are your hopes when we think about the use of AI? What are your fears when you think about AI? What do you want our schools to focus on when we're talking about AI, and bringing that feedback into the task force conversations? And then finally, making sure that the deliverables and the outputs from those task forces are things people can use, right? Like, how can I use this in the work that I am doing and help me make really good decisions about what's happening within my classrooms? And then the final piece I will say around this is that the knowledge can't just live within the task force. So, like, you've built these incredible things and now you've got all of these resources. How do we make sure that everyone within the community, our students, our teachers, and our families, can then take those and really operationalize it in ways that are meaningful?
Yeah, so much of what you're saying resonates with me a lot in our own state in Minnesota. We've worked with a few schools on their AI guidelines, and it is super important to have so many different voices on there. And one district that I worked in particular, Minneota schools, they have been really great because what they did at the very beginning was include some of their board members who are also parents in the
Mhm.
community, right? And that's like those voices are huge to be able to communicate what is going on and what's happening with the AI task force and what kind of decisions are being made. And two of the other things that you mentioned that are really important too is the voices and the planning. And I think so. By way of how we've constructed our AI guidance to help districts is by way of the MDE guiding principles for Minnesota, which there's 5, and the second one is center people, which is great because it's like how are you going to ensure that everybody in your district has had an opportunity to voice what their concerns are, what they want to do with AI, how it's impacting them. All those different things are huge. And then the other piece, the continuous improvement or continuous professional development, right? And especially with AI because it changes so rapidly. And so, yeah, I couldn't agree more on having like a sustainable professional development plan where you're continuing to learn because, like you said, it's super hard. They only have so much time, right? And many times, what we experience is like we'll go do an AI training at a school and they'll get 2 hours of that, and then it's on to the next thing, right? And that isn't really helpful for this type of thing that we have going on with AI. But I get it because they're just trying to work with what they have, right?
Yeah.
But
And oh no,
yeah,
go
go ahead.
ahead. I was just going to say, I don't think we're in this place yet, but I'm hoping that we get there where, just like all of the other professional learning that we've talked about, it can't be technology training lives over here and everything else lives over here, right? If I'm focusing on the science of reading, if I'm focusing on social and emotional learning, if I'm focusing on a new math curriculum resource, I'm hoping we get to a place where we say, okay, if these are our goals and this is what we're really working toward, how might AI support us in that or not? And then we bring that into the professional learning, because right now the AI conversation is happening over here and all of the other conversations are happening over here. And if we don't merge those conversations at some point, it feels like it's a separate thing I have to deal with. And it also feels like one more thing. And we know that we don't have time for one more thing. We really have to be focusing on the what are we going to be doing differently, not what are we going to be doing more of, because no one has time for more. We've got to really shift into the what is going to be different as we move forward, as opposed to adding another layer on when there isn't enough time to do all of the other layers we already have.
So to bounce off a couple of things here that you mentioned, you talked a little bit about the hopes and the fears, which reminded me of uh, an article that Anthropic came out with recently that described their 81,000 interviews that they did with Claude users. And they had a whole bunch of different quotes, and one of them that stuck out with me was, "We found a unicorn, and we're using it to plow a field." And like, are we wasting its potential, things to have it do those routine, mundane type of things when we could be using it to try to attack different problems. So let's assume, like with what we were talking about with building the task force or building the group that's going to bring together, that's going to have all these different voices at the table. And if all of those things come together and we decide we don't want to use AI as just a plow, can it help solve some of these historic problems that we've kind of seen over the years in schools, whether it be student absenteeism, teacher burnout, or lower achievement scores, even that were occurring before COVID happened, and we haven't rebound enough from that. Is AI and in the hands of these effective users going to help us with some of these issues that schools have traditionally faced?
I think as we approach the how does AI do more than just what we've seen over the last couple of years, we have to be really clear on what are the use cases and what are the problems we're trying to solve. Because if we can very clearly articulate that, right? Like one of the examples you gave was chronic absenteeism. Well, what are the underlying causes of chronic absenteeism? And if we know what those underlying causes are, then we can start talking about, is there a way for AI to help address one of those underlying causes, right? And so we're starting to see districts do things, especially with generative AI and agentic AI, in building tools that can help with some of the underlying causes that, or maybe potentially some of the root causes of some of those broader problems that you just laid out, or challenges that we've had in the education space. And so, districts doing everything from, we've talked a lot about career exploration and what that looks like for students in middle and high school and even younger. And, a district is using an AI agent to look at the courses students are engaging with, the things that they are most interested in, and then making recommendations for high school courses and some of the career paths they might be interested in, which goes beyond the typical survey that students would take, and also allows the counselors to have more data on what that might look like for a particular student. And so there are things like that. I'm trying to think, we're working with several districts on some of the other pieces around things like middle school students who need support from a counselor. If I'm a middle school student and I want to go see the counselor, I might ask permission to leave whatever class I'm in, go down, and if the counselor is available, great. If not, I might sit there for a while and wait for the counselor to be available. Well, a district using AI created an app that students could go in and share that they needed to see the counselor that day, would put in some information, and then it would essentially triage, like, hey, make sure you see this kid today, and it would alert the counselor so that the counselor knew, because a lot of times the counselor doesn't know because they're doing a lot of other things. And so by doing that, if the student is able to see the counselor when they need to, it may impact any number of those larger challenges that you just talked about. And so I think it's breaking it down into like, what are the root causes? Can we use an AI tool to help us with some of those things, whether they be teaching and learning, whether they be organizational or something else? And I think we're just getting to that point. Like, people are really just starting to think about building things on their own, because with vibe coding and lots of the other options that are out there, I don't need to necessarily know how to code to build the kinds of things I want to build.
Some of it comes down to like a design thinking challenge, applied to those specific issues, right?
We've done that with students.
Yeah.
So this is the third year of the ISTE and ASCD AI Innovator Studio and Challenge. And so ISTE, Lenovo, Microsoft, and Intel have all partnered to ask students to use AI tools to solve a problem of practice within their community. We're just now in the judging for this year's submissions because they were due in March. But over the last couple of years, when you see the things that kids have created, last year, one of the teams created a glove that you can use if you use ASL as your primary language. And I use the glove and it translates, and then an audio will come out of an app and tell you what I'm saying using ASL. Or a student 2 years ago who is a gamer had been catfished in a game, was asked to send photos to the catfisher. She alerted her parents, but she realized not everyone is necessarily going to alert their parents. So she used AI to highlight in gaming software, if you're having a conversation and it aligns with the patterns of a catfisher, it will alert you. And so now she can use that with other kids. I mean, it's incredible. And so the same kinds of things that our kids are doing with this challenge, we can be doing in the education space, right? Like, what are some of the challenges that we're seeing? I will say one of the things that has made me most hopeful with a lot of the AI and education conversations is around accessibility and inclusivity. The tools that we have at our fingertips to make content and communication so much more accessible than we have ever had before is because of AI. And so whether I'm using a tool like Voice It that can take non-standard speech and, for lack of a better term, translate that into standard speech, or a tool like Cephable where I can control different apps on my computer by nodding my head, is incredible. And so your question was about the unicorn, right? And I think it is about solving those very particular challenges and being really clear on what they are. And then, yes, using AI to figure out how we do those things that weren't possible before.
Yeah, and that's awesome. And you talked a little bit, you got into some of the things that Lenovo is doing, like the projects. What else is Lenovo doing, and what are you working on specifically that has you genuinely excited for the next year, couple years? What do you have going on?
Yeah. One of the big areas of focus for us right now is around hybrid AI and helping think through where we want to have personalized or personal AI, where we have enterprise AI, and where we have public AI. And what I mean by that is we are collecting more data than we have ever collected because we are training these AI tools. They're collecting more data than other tools have previously, et cetera. And as we introduce many of these tools into our classrooms in particular, we have to focus on privacy and security. And so if I'm going to use a tool like I was just talking about, like Voice It or Cephable, or there are tools, being created where they're teacher coaching tools, and they might be recording what's happening in a classroom and then giving a teacher feedback on that. Where that data goes matters. And so if I am doing voice recordings and video recordings and other things, I might want that to live on my device. So having an AI PC that can run all of those apps and that houses that data on my device matters. If I have things like I'm going to pull data from a student information system, or I'm going to pull data from an assessment tool that we're using, I want to use an enterprise AI tool so that it stays within our digital ecosystem, right? Like if I'm a Google district and I'm using Gemini as part of Workspace, anything I'm doing for work, I should be doing logged in to Gemini or Copilot, if that's one of my ecosystems, versus public AI, where maybe I'm analyzing all of our board docs. Those are already publicly available. I can do that in a public AI tool, and it's fine because that data is already out there. So helping people really think through where the data lives is something that we're really focusing on, and I think is incredibly important, because we're introducing a lot of new resources into our classrooms and need to be mindful of that. So that's one piece that I think is really going to support educators in their work. And we're working with several districts now who want to build out their own specialized language models to help them do that in an enterprise AI opportunity where it's living in their data center so that they're not sending data to the cloud that really needs to stay in-house. So I'm excited to see where those projects go. We should talk again in like 6 months, and I can give you some very concrete examples as we're working through those. But I think that's a really exciting opportunity. But you were asking what Lenovo is doing. The other thing that I would encourage and that I have seen a lot of positive impact from is districts reaching out to their industry partners. We do that all the time as educators, but reaching out and asking how they are using AI within their industry. Because right now there is a lot of conflation of AI equals chatbot in my classroom. And when you talk to folks in industry and you hear, here is how a pharmaceutical company is using AI in drug development, here is how an aviation company is using AI when we're all flying, right, to get to different places. Here is how attorneys are using AI in their work. It shifts the way you think and define AI, as we kind of talked about before, but it also gets into what does this mean for my biology curriculum and my chemistry curriculum? What does it mean for my ELA curriculum if I am preparing my kids for a world of work? And we all have our CTE advisory committees, like start there and ask those folks, who's your AI person in your industry? To start having those conversations, because the implications from a curriculum side, I think, are pretty significant, and we need to know and understand what this looks like more broadly than in the education space.
Well, thank you so much, Tara, for sharing your time with us here today. We've really enjoyed the conversation that we were able to have with you. But we like to kind of wrap things up with a little bit of a lightning round. And so we've got some questions here. Feel free to expound as much as you think you need to describe what you're thinking, or if it's just a one-word answer, that's entirely fine too. And so I'll kick off here with the first one. I know you travel around a lot. How many conferences do you get to present at in a year, do you think?
In a year, I have 2 this week. How many weeks do we work over the course of a year?
That's
It's
a great
usually
question.
somewhere around there. A lot. How's a lot?
That's a great answer.
Next one is, what's something about your doctoral research that still shapes how you think today?
A lot of the work that we focused on around opportunity gaps and really helping to ensure that all students are successful is something that I keep going back to.
You mentioned earlier about how frequently AI just keeps evolving and changing. What was something that maybe you had it wrong about AI that, in the last year or two has really kind of changed, and you're willing to admit you were wrong?
So I, maybe 2 summers ago, was working with a group in New York, and we had 3 days of training around AI for a team of teachers who really wanted to dig in. And 3 days back to back was incredible, and a really wonderful opportunity. And I was talking with Leslie Accardo, so shout out Leslie if you're hearing this. And we were having lunch, and she said, "How are things?" And I said, "Leslie, I do not want to talk about AI anymore." And this was 2 years ago, and now, right, I'm on a podcast still talking about it. I'm at 2 conferences a week, still presenting on it, right? Like, it is still part of the conversation. And I said, I really want to get back to these conversations around competency-based learning and flexible and adaptable environments and the things I've spent my career on. And she said, Tara, we all have to take a detour, and we have to know and understand. It's what we've talked about already on this call. We have to know and understand AI well enough to then decide, how does that impact the kinds of things we want to do in education? And so I share that from what maybe did we get wrong about, or I get wrong about AI in education, was that I was focusing the conversation on, what do we mean when we talk, how do we define AI? What is it? Talking about the opportunities and risks, and then not focusing enough on the what does the pedagogy piece look like. So after that conversation with Leslie, I was like, I can do both. That's really what this should be about, right? And it's how we started this conversation. And so I don't know that it's the what we got wrong about AI, but the hope that we move away from the efficiency conversation. It's the article that you referenced at the beginning too, that this is really a catalyst for something much bigger that I'm hoping we move toward.
Okay, so ChatGPT, Claude, or Gemini, can only choose one.
We left out Copilot. So for work, Copilot, because we are Microsoft ecosystem, also Claude.
Okay. Oceans or mountains?
Mountains. I do love the ocean, but mountains.
Okay. That one gets chosen a lot more than I thought. Small conference or large?
This is a total cop-out, but both for very different reasons.
You're breaking the rules, Tara, just so you know.
Sometimes we have to do that.
Yeah, we'll allow it. That's fine. Coffee or tea?
Neither. I don't drink either one.
Something else?
Water. It's very boring, like sparkling water. Does that add some?
That's totally fine. Yeah. Yeah. Healthy option. It's good. Okay, this is a tough one. Fix student engagement or fix teacher burnout?
I think teacher burnout will lead to addressing student engagement.
Okay.
So teacher burnout first, that will lead to student engagement.
Okay. And then what has to come first? Build the AI policy or guidelines, let's say, or train the teachers. What has to come first?
Train the teachers so that they can help develop the guidelines.
Awesome. All right. Well, we really appreciate your time, and we're happy to have you join us for this episode. And is there anything that you want to plug that you have upcoming, socials to follow you at, anything like that you want to mention?
So if you haven't already, I would check out the AI Innovator Studio and Challenge. The teams, as I said, we're in judging now. The 3 teams that are selected from this project will actually be presenting at ISTE Live with our Lenovo team and others. And so if you haven't had an opportunity to check that out, do, because the website also includes 15 AI literacy lessons that can be used across content areas for students. And they're very comprehensive, so that if folks are feeling a little bit uneasy about how to bring AI into their classrooms, it is super comprehensive and provides a lot of different considerations. And then there are videos on that site of all of the past winners from the challenge. And so if teachers are looking for ideas of the ways kids are engaging with AI, there's some great resources there. So I would definitely check that out.
Awesome. And we'll be sure to put that in the show description notes, and so people can access that. So we wanted to thank you again for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you soon at a conference here.
I am sure we will run into each other, and it was great to talk with you both today.
Thanks, Tara.
Thanks, Tara.